Thanks everyone for joining us today. Let me go over kind of a couple of housekeeping notes before we get into our presentation for today. So first of all, just want to remind folks of the whole series we have. We are doing this every month. So here we are for March 4th, but April 1st will be our next presentation. So mark your calendars for that one if you'd like to join us there. And it'll be 5 things to do today to manage risk in your company. And we'll have Dina Johnson joining us as our guest presenter for that. And then on May 6th, Generations in the Workforce, Tara Mastel with MSU Extension will be talking a little about kind of some different ways that generations view things and communications across different generations within your company and workplace and things there too. And since I've got this open, I'll just thank our sponsors now. So this series is brought to you by a whole group of different folks. Montana State University, Montana Economic Developers Association, the U.S. Small Business Administration Network here in Montana, and the Montana Department of Commerce, as well as some additional support from the University of Montana and Grow Great Falls Economic Development. So kind of a collaborative of all this group. So we're glad that we can offer this series to you at no cost. And with that, let me get us turned over here to our presenter for today. Let me make you all right, Morgan, you should now have presenter abilities, and if you want to share your screen, you can do that. So our presentation today is going to be brought to us by Morgan Slember. Morgan is the Director of Women's Entrepreneurship and Leadership at the University of Montana, and in that role, she gets the opportunity to coach and connect inspiring human beings with other inspiring human beings. So, and today she's going to talk to us about strategic communication and support for women in businesses. And your slides look great, Morgan. I think you're on mute at the moment. It's going to be at the bottom there is where the mute button will be. It'll be a pop-up menu that comes in for you. I can actually centrally do it for you, actually. Let's see. I actually can't with you being presenter. You'll have to unmute yourself. And we will encourage folks to send in questions through the chat window, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll encourage you to unmute and ask any other questions you've got.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Sounds great, Morgan.
Okay, sorry everybody, I'm new to WebEx, so forgive me, but thank you for your patience. And please let me know if at any time my video or audio lags, and I will do my best to like adjust or maybe turn my video off. So thank you for being here. I'm an informal presenter. So if you have any questions along the way, whether you're somebody who provides support to businesses or you are a business owner, I'm super happy to help however I can. Yeah, I've done a lot of marketing in my past. So however I can be helpful, I'd love to help. Okay, so a little bit about me. I love working on strategy, and I think marketing has a lot of strategy involved, but I also love business strategy, and I've owned quite a few small businesses in my day. I've also done some university IP stuff, founded a couple of conferences, and then I consider myself a big advocate for women in business. And I'm going to talk about that next, just a little bit more about why I do the work that I do. And then we'll get into like 3 takeaways that I think are most important when you're conducting outreach to women or even gender neutral, people who are on the gender spectrum. So hopefully that'll be beneficial to some of you on the call. So the problem for a lot of women in business, and again, this is why I do the work that I do, there are a lot of societal and cultural systems that impede women's ability to be successful. And you can think about that in terms of a career or in terms of owning a business. So these are all several reasons that contribute to women's statistical, like less successful especially on the money side of things, circumstances. A lot of it has to do with less workplace flexibility, implicit bias. There are also unpaid jobs at home. They're also often the primary child care and elder care providers. And then a lot of these other pieces are mainly on how they see themselves. So I think it's, and whether that's cultural, influencing, I think that that's a large part of it. So this is a lot of what's happening for women on their way to achieving parity. There are also disparities, and these statistics I trot out because they really light a fire under me and the reason that I do the work I do. So 20% of businesses are owned by women, and only 2% of all venture capital goes to women. So you can imagine 98% of that money is being distributed to a lot of men in the world. And so they're missing, I think, on critical opportunities and critical investments by having such a like hetero male pipeline. Then in addition, we've got disparities more. 50% of male business owners get bank loans, only 30% of female business owners get bank loans. So again, like, are these cultural pieces to the pie? And I think they are. Like, how are our biases affecting some of these disparities? Also, 80% of board members for publicly traded companies are male, and only 20% of board members for publicly traded companies are women. So again, like, there's just not parity yet, and people are really working toward that. And hopefully through some marketing and outreach, we can change some of these numbers as well. So all hope is not lost, have no fear. McKinsey does have great statistics that identify gender diverse executive teams that are to be 21% more likely to have higher profits if they have diverse teams on those boards. So there's also research from Harvard on leadership, and women tend to outperform their male peers as far as leadership inside of organizations. Inc. also cites that female founders improve larger economic growth, they reduce poverty, they reinvest profits in local communities, and they increase innovation in their communities and around the world. So these are all important reasons of why I support female founders, because they get stuff done. A lot of women get stuff done. If they're given the opportunity, or they have an ally, they have somebody to support them to overcome some of these cultural systems that are impeding their progress, they can get stuff done. So pre-pandemic, I want to kind of transition into some new numbers, but still having to do with women. 85% of purchases are attributed to women, 75% of spending is driven by women, and 38% of women manage household finances compared to 30% of men and 28% equal. So I wanted to bring this statistic up because not only, are women getting stuff done if they're given the chance, they're also driving a lot of consumer behavior. So as businesses, that's something to really think about, regardless of who your product, who the end user is, it's who's making the purchase. And I think that is often missed. And some of these numbers are from, I think, a really fascinating article in Entrepreneur, and I have a sources slide at the end. So if we distribute the slide deck, you can definitely peruse it. But the 38% is from Pew Research. So it's really fascinating to me where I think we're moving toward a more equitable household management of finances, but women are still managing the majority of it. So how do we better communicate with and market to women who seem to be making all of these purchases for their household, or who seem to need some different kinds of communication to connect with them? So I'll say three things, the three things that are most important: empathy, using the right language, and acknowledging biases. So those three things I think are critical to how we do outreach, not just to women. I mean, you can apply this to every gender category, but I think it is especially important for women and people who are non-identifying on the gender spectrum. Maybe they don't identify with a gender, or they've changed genders. So I think empathy, using the right language, and acknowledging biases are going to be three steps that help you be profound marketers and profound communicators with different audiences. And also, I should say on these three things, really these principles I think can be applied to not just business outreach, but it can be applied to like service-based businesses. It can be applied to consulting and coaching. Like if you're using empathy, if you're focusing on the right language for the people that you're working with, and you're acknowledging your own biases or your team's biases, that's going to go a long way for anybody that you're working with. Might even help your family situation. Who knows? Like communication inside of in your personal life. So empathy is really the basis for all of the things that go along with marketing and will help you become a better marketer. So a lot of the studies that I read for this were really, really interesting because a lot of marketers tend to think of themselves as empathetic, and they think that they're putting themselves in other people's shoes, but they really aren't. So even there are some Harvard studies that cite like an American Association of Marketing studies that cite marketers thinking about marketing as like themselves, and they're putting their own life into somebody else's shoes instead of hopping into somebody else's shoes. So I think it's an important distinction, and a lot of marketers mark themselves as doing really well for empathy, and they think that they've really stepped into somebody else's shoes, but they really haven't done the work, and it reflects in a lot of the interactions with their marketing campaigns or their outreach, the language they use. So I think that's really important, and I will come back to that on giving you some actions on how to ensure that you really are stepping into somebody else's shoes. So Harvard definitely has research that cites that an exceptional salesperson has two balanced qualities: empathy and ego drive. So they have some kind of desire to make something happen, but they also have empathy so they can really feel how others feel. HubSpot also identifies empathy as essential. So they're also thinking about genuine curiosity, asking questions when they're talking with a new lead. So they really are trying to understand that person, not just in the context of the sale, but also in the context of who are they, where are they coming from, how can I connect with this person? So I think that's really important. There are also several other like marketing and sales strategies that come up if you Google empathy and marketing or empathy and sales. Salesforce has a bunch of stuff. I think you'll be surprised by how many resources exist. So if this is kind of interesting to you, there's a lot of resources out there that can help you. So your empathy actions, what can you do as a marketer to enhance some of your empathy when you're working with other people or when you're building campaigns? Identifying personas of actual or prospective customers. So who are they? Who are these people that are coming to you? Who are they working with for you? Feel free to in the chat if you have some personas that you want to list out. We can go through them later. But you may know some people who are already your key clients in your target market or a segment of your target market. Or you may, if you're just starting out in business, have some prospective customers in mind. So who are they? What do they look like? And you can go as deep in creating a persona as creating something that's like, oh, here's Heather. So I have a friend who worked at Honest Tea for years, and they have literally names and pictures and boards that are almost like a mood board of who Heather is and what her typical day looks like. And they built those on focus groups. So that brings me into this next number 2. Find the people of those personas and interview them with open-ended questions about their needs surrounding your product. So it could be a one-on-one, it could be a focus group. You could already have an existing community that you could poll, but you want to test your assumptions and actually listen. You don't want to go in with leading questions, all open-ended. And the goal here is literally to listen to the customer, hear their journey, hear their challenges. Some of you may be familiar with the strategizer canvases. If you aren't, I highly recommend you look into the value proposition canvas when you're thinking about marketing. But what are the customer needs? What are the pains? And what are their gains? Like, what are their jobs to be done? If you understand your customer and you really interview them rather than just your assumptions, maybe you have some assumptions, but if you test them with an open open-ended conversation with some people who meet that criteria of your persona, you're going to be really shocked about what you learn. And you're going to have a lot of data that you can compare and contrast with other interviews that you do. So that leads me to number 3, tabulate common customer challenges, pains, wins, and every day. Like what is the common language they use? What is the common challenge that they faced? Where are these points of synergy from your interviews and from your customer discovery? Like, what are these points of synergy, like that kind of align? And then how do you tell a story around that? That's meaty, that's real, that's authentic. And I think Gen Z right now and millennial generation, that's what they're craving, is authenticity, like cutting through a lot of the noise and identifying with a brand, identifying with a message, and kind of living a certain kind of lifestyle that their heart is really in line with. So how, there was a great AMA article, again on my slide, how would this make the consumer feel? That's a question that this company XOXO asks a lot, and they do, or OXO, sorry, they sell like a lot of different things at Bed Bath & Beyond, so like from salad spinners to peelers, and their story was really empowering. A man whose wife was suffering from Alzheimer's, their founder, redesigned some of the tools she was using in the kitchen because her hands were arthritic and she needed some additional support. So they really structured and still structure their process design with interviewing customers, really putting themselves in other people's shoes. They test their own products, they design them, then they test them with their personas, with the people who might use them. So I think that's something, an analogy. It doesn't have to be just for a product. It can totally be for a service. It's interchangeable. If you have the ability to empathize with your customers, you are going to connect with them. Your messages will cut through the noise and you will build a powerful brand that people want to align themselves with. Women especially. Your language action. So how do you use the right language? Listen. So based on some of your empathy mapping or some of those customer discovery and customer interviews, you will uncover some of the right language to use. So we might use language in our brains as marketers, and I think marketers and people who do outreach and are people, we always think we're doing a good job. We think we're putting ourselves in their shoes and we think we're using the right language, but that can backfire. And you can probably think of a million campaigns where you're like, oof, they missed the mark, or ooh, that was really sexist. You can probably think of a million campaigns that you've seen in your life where you're like, ugh, man, that's a bummer. So that's what happens when we think we know what other people's experiences are, rather than truly investigating them and interviewing them, or having it. Some of you may have like an ongoing relationship with customers where you can ask them questions live if you're a coach or you're somebody who has a deeper relationship with your customers. Getting that feedback is imperative, because then you can actually reflect the language that they use for any campaign in your testimonials, or even in just one-liners that across your website or in social media campaigns. Even when you're talking to people, you'll notice trends in the language they use, and you can mirror that back. Some of you may be familiar with mirroring, and that can go for body language as well. But listen, then learn, and listening will get you the right language. You can also research to get the right language. So based on personas, you can track where your customers are. That's the beauty of so many online marketplaces, so many customer reviews, so many social media rants. That is where the meat of your research can lie. Like, who are these people? What did they really hate about a certain product? And what did they really hate about a certain campaign? You could look up YouTube campaigns, look through the comments to see what people are saying, look through the language that they're using. You might identify some key personas there. You can get into a lot when you're looking through Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, but then also Amazon reviews and other maybe competitor websites. You might see what people are saying. And you can use competitor websites too if they're positioning and they seem to be doing a really great job. You can see, is their language appropriate with your personas? You can take some of their language and see if it resonates and reconstruct it. Ask. So the other thing is, digital communication is an amazing way to crowdsource your options. So can you create and construct a simple Instagram poll that's in stories, that's a yes or no. Like, does this phrase resonate with you? Yes or no, simple as that. Or on LinkedIn, is there an option where you can post a small MailChimp survey? There's so many different ways that you can get feedback from people right now, that why don't we do that? Why don't we get some initial feedback on a campaign from potential customers or from actual customers? Or if it's longer term, rather than just a campaign, if it's branding, really taking the time to focus in on the language that resonates with your target audience, I think is really important. Sometimes as like one person businesses, it's hard to find the time, but I think you'll find that it resonates way more with people when you do take the time. And actually, in some of those interviews, you might end up making a sale that you didn't think you're going to, just because you're coming at it from a really empathetic place of understanding. Okay, so biases. This is a big one, and this is where, Joel, I'm going to try and click a video. But some of you, like in the last like 2 or 3 or 4 years, implicit bias has been something that's been talked about a lot, and some of it, according to PBS, is attributed to Hillary Clinton using the phrase in the 2016 presidential election. So implicit bias, I think, is really important to understand and identify, both with yourself, but also your team, to understand what biases you may have as a team. So we all have subconscious biases from our past, from how we grew up, from our surroundings, and understanding how those can affect our decision-making processes, or subconsciously affect how we see other people, how we think about other people, is really critical to being a good marketer, because otherwise you might find yourself in a snafu, where you've made an assumption versus actually doing the work, and that assumption is based on your life, not someone else's, and your lens, not someone else's. So I'm going to try and click this video. Joel, because I'm sharing Microsoft PowerPoint, the PowerPoint slide, do you think I need to transition to the full screen?
No, I go ahead and give it a try. I think it'll work.
Okay. Okay, let's see. And also, I'm hoping that the audio will work too. Oh, it looks like it's a mail to link. Shoot.
Well, why don't maybe we do this? Let me start with a question, and maybe we can
Okay.
bring that link up, or if you want to email it to me, I could share it from this end too. So we had 2 questions come in. I'll start with the first, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. If you've identified as a business owner that you'd like to do more, set a different tone in terms of empathy, do you have any resources about training your staff that you have on board to join in your vision for where you'd like your business to be?
Yes, so like in Montana, I don't know that there's any like empathy training, but there are resources. There are definitely bias resources online that I'll share with you, which I think is a good first step. And then doing reading just about like on my resources slide, I will provide like a lot of different articles that are helpful to consider empathy for your business if you have those personas built. So there are like a ton of articles that give you like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6. So yes, there are resources out there for you. You could probably do a Google search with and find a university that's offering some of that. And I would wager that or even I wonder too, if IDEO, which is a Stanford spinoff, some of you may be familiar with it, that does a lot of design thinking work, they might also have something along those lines. So I would do some Googling. Unfortunately, we don't offer that right now at UM, and I haven't heard anything like that at MSU. But there are free implicit bias courses that can also help you, and that link is on my resource slide. Great question.
All right. Thank you. And if possible, we'll make your slides available to folks.
Yes, I would love that.
So that they can have that resource as well. So the second question that came in, and this might be a little bit out of turn. I know later in the year we're going to talk a little bit about funding, but you mentioned that women entrepreneurs only get 2% of capital investments. Are there any resources in the state that are specifically targeted towards women business owners to maybe help narrow that gap a little?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I know a few things. So no, yes and no. So Prospera actually is doing a great job in Bozeman. They have a $10,000, I think it's an annual grant that they give to an existing business. So that's one resource in the state. There are also several, so my program, Pursue Your Passions at University of Montana, is focused on training and helping women really think through value proposition design, business models, and then getting the coaching that they need to move their idea forward. But there's no funding attached to that. Nationally, there are trends of alternative funding sources. So rather than a venture capital model, although there are some great venture capitalists, actually some in Bozeman, Homestay Capital is doing a really great job of thinking through alternative funding. But I think there are trends of alternative funds and women forward funds. I think even Serena Williams has started to invest in an African American women's fund. There are also additional women's funds that are coming out. So it's kind of at the cusp of transitioning and also flipping the model. So this is something else that I like to tell a lot of people, and we ask a lot of people this question when they come through our doors, is what does success look like to you? I think that's a really important question to ask yourself. So are you growing a 10x business, or are you growing a business that is a Main Street business and that's your happy place? You know, success looks very different for a lot of different people. And so it's important to define that, because you may not be a venture ready or venture worthy business. It just depends on your type. So that brings me to my next point. There are alternatives now that are popping up that are really exciting in our world, like income sharing agreements, where entrepreneurs, especially I think this benefits women and people of color who often don't meet the criteria for bank loans, who don't have a lot of assets, who don't have a lot of collateral to put up for a business loan. There are new funds that are emerging that are income sharing agreements, where you're given a certain amount of money, and when you start to make revenue targets, so when you're starting to make some income and you're meeting certain targets, then you start paying some of that money back. And it's not until you hit specific metrics that you pay money back. And those are popping up on the eastern coasts. And I will say University of Montana is looking and watching a lot of that, and hoping that there are some grant calls in the future that we can take to create something along those lines. Great question.
All right. Well, thank you. That's the questions that have come in the chat. So I'm going to invite people, either one, to continue to send questions in the chat, or two, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask Morgan a question directly, now would be a good time for that. And Morgan, if you want to drop that link into the chat box, I can certainly share that. So we can all watch it.
I pulled it up, Joel. So I'm wondering, am I able, so if I stop sharing maybe and share my whole desktop, maybe that'll show everybody.
And then choose the optimize for video on the top of that menu.
Yeah, I did choose that. So I'm hoping that it'll work. Okay, can everybody see this okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. And then let me know too, Joel, if the sound works. I'm sorry we didn't test this yesterday. Okay, here we go.
I am not hearing any sound.
No sound? Oh, dang it. It's such a great video.
Why don't you, if you drop that link in and then let me share, I think I can probably get it.
Okay, thanks, Joel.
And again, if there's a question or two, now would be a great time to ask it while I set that up.
Okay, great. And I can keep going too. It's not that big of a deal. Why don't I, while Joel's pulling that up really quick, I'll just, since you guys can still see my screen. So this video will just tell us a little bit about implicit bias, and it'll give us a couple steps to how we can take some personal action toward addressing it. Then the next step is practice what you preach. So you need to understand your customers, but if you're not tackling implicit bias personally and as an organization, then it doesn't really matter. You know, you're not walking the walk. And it's really important that you do both. And then finally, take an implicit bias course, have your team take it, and make it a part of your onboarding process. I think that's critical. And then bring that lens into your marketing. So how have your biases affected how you're viewing the world? And what are those small steps that you're taking personally? That's going to infiltrate into a lot of your communications. Thank you, Joel.
All right, well, now you can tell me if you're hearing audio here.
Okay.
Look at how to measure bias in ourselves and in others. Here's Dolly Chug from NYU.
We sent emails to real professors in real universities.
They contacted over 6,500 professors at random from 260 American universities.
We sent them an email that looked like it came from a real person asking for a meeting to learn more about the PhD program in that university. But we randomly assigned whether the fictional person sending that email had a name that sounded male or female and sounded white, Chinese, Hispanic, Indian, or Black. What we found that is if you were a white male, you were far more likely to receive a response back than if you were in all those other categories put together as a group.
Some of this could be explicit racism, but it's far more likely that in many cases, these professors are just busy. They can't respond to every email they get, so they kind of let their subconscious decide for them. And that's where their biases come through. Research shows that our racial biases are often more about who we choose to help than who we don't. And we tend to help people who are similar to us. But you aren't 6,500 randomly selected professors. So how can you figure out where you might be making similar unconscious choices? First, there's a well-known test online you can take that can help show you biases you hold. Or
just do an audit. Whatever data you have, whether it's formal data in a computer or whether it's just data that's sort of anecdotal, look at the data. For example, I met this fantastic executive in Silicon Valley. He takes great pride in being someone who actively tries to achieve gender balance on his teams, knowing that Silicon Valley and tech are skewed heavily male.
So he looked at his professional social network, his Twitter, his LinkedIn.
He found his network was far more skewed male than he expected. So there's a place where he could actively work to shift that, and that's what he's been doing since then.
So this is not a scientifically exact self-audit, but it can still be useful, and you can audit anything. So maybe start by taking that online test for bias. Maybe check out whose emails you're replying to. But you can also audit yourself for implicit bias by asking a friend to observe you in the real world. If you're a teacher, have people look at who you call on most in class, whatever your interactions are.
One practical thing that people should do is take stock of their friends. It would be very useful for people to actually make lists of people with whom they spend time.
Look for patterns. That's the audit. That's the assessment we can all do.
Next time, some people say you should go out and make as many friends of different races as possible, but does that actually work?
Thanks, Joel. Okay, I just have a few more slides, and then let me go ahead and reshare here, and then we'll open it up to questions again. And yeah, feel free along the way to ask whatever questions you have in the chat or out loud. Stop me if you need to. So we went over biases, and that PBS video is one of 4, I believe. So if you want to watch those, they're great. They're all like 2.5 minutes, really quick. And you can take the test. I believe the test they refer to is in the comments there. So feel free, that could be an action that you take or an action you have your team take to better understand and reflect on their biases. And they talked about in both relation to race and to gender, and I think that that's really wonderful. A lot of these things are just going to help communication across a lot of different, I don't know, like latitudes or verticals, whatever you would call them. So next, I wanted to just highlight these. These are the last 2 slides I have, and they're wordy, but I think they're really interesting. The AMA's 6 Principles for Marketing to Women Ethically, and it has a little bit of a longer title. I shortened it for the sake of our conversation and also paraphrased. So I'm going to read these quickly and then we'll end, and I want to open it to any questions that you have. So don't position your brand as a pivotal solution to sexism or even as a feminist advocate if your first objective on the brief is to make money. So they talk about how women will sense that it's not authentic. So really, you like I said, you want to do the customer interviews, the personas, be authentic in what it is that you're doing and who you are as a brand and an organization. Honor the lived experiences of women and reflect them realistically in your marketing. As a brand, you're not the solution or savior. Leverage customer insights where gaps exist and really listen. So a lot of what we've already talked about. Live your purpose and values inside of your organization. If there's sexual harassment in your organization, root it out, pay women equally. So I think those are really, really critical pieces as well. So, you know, ensuring that we are, like we just talked about, living our values, taking implicit bias tests, ensuring that we're using empathy, all of those pieces. Don't be a brand splainer. In other words, don't explain women's experiences to them. Don't intellectualize them, distance or minimize these experiences. Don't make it funny or silly or saccharine. I think that this piece is really interesting. So how do you celebrate a woman's experience? How do you make it feel authentic and ring true? How do you get those interviews with your potential customers to ensure that it feels authentic and that it really is coming from a place of honesty? Educate and immerse yourself on the issues. So we've all, you know, in the last year during the pandemic, been told to do that, at least as white people, as white cis people. You know, we have a duty to read the issues when it comes to racism, when it comes to gender, it's the same thing. And I think, unfortunately, women of color are often at the bottom of the pile when we look at all of these statistics. So how do we educate and immerse ourselves to be allies? How do we really start to become more empathetic and really understand the issues at hand? Understand, internalize, and evangelize a purpose-driven branding model and measure all of your work against it. It acts as a North Star when decisions are difficult or confusing. So again, how are we ensuring that we're being authentic, open, honest, and really celebrating the organization? So it's not just faked communication here. We're really trying to reach a certain target market that will benefit from our products or services. And we firmly believe that. So how do we really create purpose within our organization to ensure that it's authentic when we're connecting with people? Okay, so that concludes my my presentation. I'm curious what questions you may have and how I can be helpful, whether you have startup questions, if you have marketing questions that I skipped over that in my slide deck, but I do have a marketing background actually. So I'm happy to help with any of those kinds of things if they would be helpful to you.
All right, well, thanks, Morgan. We did have one comment that someone commented it's a great idea to include the self-bias awareness into the onboarding process. So that's great. Any questions from anyone? And again, please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to just ask the question. I was told in the last 9 months that 6 seconds is the appropriate pause on webinars for waiting for other comments. So I didn't time myself here, but
okay. Well, please, everybody, you can take my email, send me an email if you're an introvert, which I celebrate introverts as well. So if you're an introvert and you need to ask me questions, feel free to email me or connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, and I'm happy to answer your questions there as well.
All right, well, thank you very much, Morgan. And we will post a recording of this to our website, and we'll also post a PDF version of these slides, so those resources will be available to you. And then again, mark your calendar, April 1st will be our April webinar, and we will have Dina Johnson from Payne West Insurance talking about 5 things to do today to manage risk in your company. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.